charge.
In the late 11th century,
For
the
honor
lands of the
and
Middle
glory.
East became the stage for one of history's most turbulent struggles. Crusader armies poured in from Europe, clashing with Seljuk Turks, Arab dynasties, and fractured Muslim powers who fought each other as much as they resisted the invaders. This was a world of shifting alliances, sudden betrayals, and brutal warfare where no city, ruler, or faith could feel entirely secure. Out of this chaos rose whispers of a mysterious sect, hidden in the mountains, striking without warning and vanishing into the shadows. Their enemies called them their assassins, and the very name began to inspire both fear and fascination. To understand them, one must first understand the world that gave birth to them. The Islamic world at this time was far from unified. The Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad still claimed spiritual authority, but its power had waned. The Seljuk Turks dominated politically, while rival Shia factions challenged them from Egypt and Persia. Within Islam itself, the Shia minority felt persecuted, fractured into different sects that often had to survive in secrecy. Among them were the Ismailis, whose teachings focused on hidden knowledge, loyalty to a spiritual guide, and the belief that true authority rested not in worldly rulers but in their divinely chosen imam. It was from this tradition that a breakaway group, the Nizari Ismailis, emerged under the leadership of Hassan I-Sabah. The timing of their rise could not have been more dramatic. The First Crusade had just shaken the Middle East, carving out Christian states along the coast and threatening the Muslim heartlands. Armies of Europe established themselves in Jerusalem, Ansh, and Tripoli, bringing foreign rulers who claimed divine right to lands long ruled by Islamic dynasties. For the Crusaders, the Muslim world appeared fragmented and weak, but beneath the surface new forces were gathering. The Nizaris, though small in number, understood something their enemies did not: fear could be more powerful than armies. In an age when castles dominated the landscape, they would carve out their own fortresses high in the mountains, places almost impossible to conquer. From there, they struck with daggers rather than swords, using selective killings to shift politics and terrorize their rivals. Contemporary chroniclers, both Christian and Muslim, described them with a mixture of horror and fascination. Tales spread of silent killers emerging from crowds, of rulers who went to bed in luxury only to wake with a dagger lying beside them as a warning. Some claimed these men were drugged with hashish to dull their fear of death, others that they were under mystical spells that bound them in total obedience. Whether exaggerated or not, the stories magnified their reputation. The name assassin itself became a symbol, not of armies on the battlefield, but of unseen danger lurking in every shadow. This was a world where power could change hands with the thrust of a blade, and no leader, however mighty, could ever feel safe. The sect's emergence was not merely a curiosity of history but a direct reflection of the unstable, fractured society from which they rose. While the Crusaders fought bloody battles in the plains and deserts, another war was being waged in silence and secrecy, one that would outlast kingdoms and leave behind a legend still alive today. Hassan I-Sabah's story begins not in the shadow of daggers but in the halls of learning. Born in Persia in the 11th century, he grew up in an environment of intellectual ferment, where theology, philosophy, and politics often intertwined. Early accounts portray him as a brilliant student with a sharp mind and unshakable willpower, drawn to the teachings of the Ismailis, a Shia sect that placed great emphasis on hidden knowledge and the authority of the imam. His path was not easy, for to embrace such a belief in a world dominated by the Sunni Abbasids and their Seljuk allies meant to live as both an outsider and a target. Yet Hassan's determination set him apart. He was no ordinary scholar seeking quiet contemplation. He possessed the vision of a leader who could shape history with faith, cunning, and unyielding discipline. Through his travels and debates, Hassan became deeply immersed in the spiritual and political dimensions of Ismaili thought. He saw in it not just theology but a framework for resistance against oppressive rulers. His journey eventually led him to the mountains of Persia, where he seized upon an opportunity that would transform his destiny. There, perched high above the surrounding valleys, stood the fortress of Alamet. Remote, defensible, and almost impregnable, Alamet was more than stone walls. It was a sanctuary where Hassan could build a community bound by faith and absolute loyalty. Accounts suggest he captured it through clever deception rather than open warfare, gaining control with minimal bloodshed. From that moment, Alamet became the beating heart of his movement and the nerve center of an organization that would terrify kings and armies alike. Inside Alamet, Hassan imposed a strict code of life. He lived with austerity, demanding the same from his followers. Luxury and weakness were forbidden. Instead, discipline, devotion, and sacrifice were cultivated. His followers were taught not only religious doctrine but also the arts of stealth, disguise, and assassination. What made them truly formidable was not their physical strength but their willingness to die without hesitation for their leader and their faith. To outside observers, this loyalty appeared unbreakable, bordering on the supernatural. Legends later claimed Hassan used drugs to dull their senses, but the truth likely lies in his ability to inspire absolute belief, convincing his followers that their deaths would serve a divine purpose. Alamet itself became more than a fortress. It was a symbol of defiance, a beacon for Ismailis persecuted across the region. Within its walls, scholars copied texts, developed strategies, and prepared missions that would send small groups of fidei, devotees, into the heart of enemy strongholds. Unlike traditional armies, Hassan's network did not rely on numbers. It relied on select individuals armed with a dagger and unshakable conviction. Each mission was carefully chosen, each target calculated to shift political power in ways armies could not. A vizier here, a general there, sometimes even a crusader lord, each death was a message as much as a tactic. Hassan himself rarely left Alamet after securing it, but his presence loomed over every operation. Chroniclers describe him as severe, uncompromising, and utterly dedicated. He executed even his own sons when they violated the strict code, showing that no one, not even his blood, stood above the mission. To his enemies, he was the old man of the mountain, a figure both mysterious and terrifying, hidden away yet capable of reaching across borders with silent killers. To his followers, he was the imam's representative on earth, a spiritual father whose commands were sacred. Under Hassan's leadership, the Nizari Ismailis were transformed from a persecuted sect into a disciplined force that shook the medieval world. From their mountain stronghold, they created a new kind of power, one built not on vast armies or great cities but on fear, faith, and the strategic removal of those who stood in their way. By the time Hassan died in 1124, he had secured not only Alamet but also a reputation that would echo across centuries. His vision of a community bound by absolute loyalty and directed by calculated strikes ensured that even the mightiest rulers would never sleep without wondering if a dagger awaited them in the dark. The true strength of the assassins did not lie in armies or fortresses, but in their mastery of fear. Where other powers relied on knights, cavalry, or vast battalions of infantry, the Nizari Ismailis understood that a single blade, placed at the right moment, could achieve what thousands of soldiers could not. Their chosen agents, known as the fidei, were carefully trained not only in the art of killing but in patience, disguise, and the ability to infiltrate the very heart of enemy power. Each fidei was prepared to die for his mission, and this devotion made them unlike any other force of the medieval world. They did not fight in open battle, for that would mean certain destruction. Instead, they turned the enemy's own sense of safety into a weapon, proving that nowhere was truly beyond their reach. The methods of the assassins were carefully crafted to maximize psychological impact. Unlike mercenaries or hired killers, they rarely struck in secret and vanished without a trace. Many of their missions were designed to be public, executed in crowded marketplaces, at the gates of mosques, or even in the courts of rulers surrounded by their guards. The point was not merely to eliminate a target but to send a message that their hand could extend anywhere. A dagger thrust in daylight, carried out in front of witnesses, would echo far more deeply than a quiet poisoning. By ensuring that deaths were seen and retold, the assassins magnified the terror they inspired, turning every rumor into a weapon as potent as the blade itself. One of their most feared techniques was infiltration. A fidei might spend months or even years living under a false identity in order to get close to a target. They could serve as guards, servants, or even trusted companions. When the time came, they would strike suddenly, often at point-blank range, with a dagger chosen specifically for its silence and its intimacy. Such acts revealed not only discipline but terrifying patience. Rulers knew that a loyal attendant could be an assassin in disguise, and this paranoia sowed divisions within courts and armies. No fortress wall could keep them out if trust itself could be corrupted. Stories from the time emphasize the power of intimidation as much as the killings themselves. Some rulers awoke to find a dagger placed beside them while they slept, with no explanation but the silent warning that they were being watched. Others received letters sealed with threats, reminding them that obedience to assassin demands was the only way to remain alive. Chroniclers recount that entire cities and armies trembled when the sect was rumored to be involved, for their name carried an aura of inevitability. To defy them meant risking not only one's life but the loyalty of those closest, since anyone might be the blade in waiting. Their targets were chosen carefully, not at random. They went after viziers who oppressed their communities, generals who threatened their strongholds, and kings or princes whose deaths could tip the balance of power. Sometimes, the killings aided their own survival; other times, they served to influence broader conflicts, weakening an enemy at the crucial moment. Unlike the chaos of open war, these assassinations were surgical, precise, and deliberate. In this sense, the assassins waged a political war as much as a military one, shaping events with daggers where others used armies. What made their reputation grow far beyond their numbers was the atmosphere of dread that followed each act. The sect itself was relatively small compared to the massive powers around them, yet chroniclers from both the Islamic and Crusader worlds spoke of them in tones of awe and horror. Legends spread that they were drugged with hashish, bound in illusions of paradise, and unleashed as fanatics who knew no fear of death. Whether true or not, these stories only magnified their image. The uncertainty of how they recruited, trained, and motivated their killers left an air of mystery that proved even more terrifying than the reality. Fear, after all, does not need truth to thrive. The assassins mastered the art of being unseen yet ever present, making themselves larger than life in the imagination of their enemies. By striking in daylight, by choosing high-profile targets, and by showing utter disregard for their own survival, they turned themselves into a weapon of terror that no king could ever fully guard against. It was not their numbers that mattered, but the chilling knowledge that a single dagger, carried by a believer hidden in plain sight, could alter the fate of nations. The assassins' influence reached its most dramatic stage when they confronted both Muslim rulers and the Crusader lords of the Holy Land. Unlike earlier missions that struck at viziers and generals in Persia, their targets now included some of the most powerful figures in the region. The great Muslim commander Saladin, who would one day unite Egypt and Syria and face the Crusaders at Hattin, became one of their most famous intended victims. Twice, according to chroniclers, his life was nearly cut short by dagger-wielding Fedari who managed to penetrate his camp. On one occasion, they struck during the night, slipping past guards to reach his very tent. Though Saladin survived, the attempt left him shaken, and he ordered his troops to hunt the sect mercilessly. Yet even a commander of his stature, leading armies and winning battles, could not rid himself of the fear that the assassins might come again. His close calls proved that no amount of power or protection guaranteed safety. The Crusader states, too, came to know the assassin's silent power. The most notorious episode was the killing of Conrad of Montferrat in 1192, a moment that stunned Europe and Jerusalem alike. Conrad had just been elected king of Jerusalem and was poised to lead the fragile Crusader kingdom into a new phase of conflict. Days after his coronation, he was stabbed to death in the streets of Tyre by assassins disguised as monks. The murder threw the Crusader world into chaos, sparking rumors that rival Crusader leaders, perhaps even Richard the Lionheart, had colluded with the assassins to remove a dangerous rival. Whether or not these accusations were true, the act itself demonstrated the reach of Hassan's heirs. They could alter the destiny of kingdoms not by armies but with a single strike in the heart of a city. Beyond individual killings, the assassins shaped the very politics of the Crusader frontier. At times, they made pragmatic alliances, even negotiating with Crusader lords against common enemies. Chroniclers noted that the sect could be both enemy and partner, depending on circumstance. Their unpredictability only deepened their reputation. To friend or foe alike, they remained a constant reminder that ambition could end in a heartbeat, no matter how high the walls or how loyal the guards. By the late 12th century, rulers across the Middle East spoke of the assassins with a mix of fear, grudging respect, and suspicion. Their blades reached Muslim generals, Christian kings, and ambitious princes alike, cutting through the boundaries of religion and politics. In a world torn between the Crusades and internal rivalries, the sect thrived by reminding every power that survival depended not only on armies, but on vigilance against the shadow of the hidden dagger. By the middle of the 13th century, the assassins faced a threat unlike any they had ever known. For decades they had outlasted crusaders, survived Saladin's wrath, and unnerved rulers with their calculated killings, but now a far more relentless enemy was sweeping across the Middle East, the Mongols. Under Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, armies descended upon Persia and Mesopotamia with a ferocity unmatched in living memory. Entire cities were annihilated, libraries burned, and populations slaughtered. Even the assassins, whose mountain fortresses had once seemed invulnerable, could not hope to withstand the storm forever. The stronghold of Alamet, the very heart of the sect, stood as their greatest defense. Perched high among steep cliffs, it had been their sanctuary for nearly 2 centuries, a place where assassins were trained, strategies crafted, and texts preserved. Yet Hulagu's army brought siege engines, overwhelming numbers, and a ruthlessness that made resistance futile. Unlike the Crusaders or Seljuks, who could be frightened by assassination or negotiated with, the Mongols advanced with absolute determination. The assassins attempted diplomacy, sending envoys to plead for survival, but the Mongols demanded nothing less than unconditional surrender. When the siege of Alamet began in 1256, the defenders quickly realized their situation was hopeless. Some sources claim the imam of the sect, Rukn al-Din Kosha, attempted to negotiate terms, ordering the destruction of some of their own fortifications in hopes of mercy. But mercy was not in Hulagu's nature. The Mongols stormed Alamet with fire and iron, tearing down walls that had seemed untouchable for generations. Libraries filled with Ismaili writings and philosophical works were set ablaze, erasing centuries of knowledge in a single night. Chroniclers who later described the fall wrote of rivers running red with blood and of treasures reduced to ash. The destruction of Alamet was more than the fall of a fortress, it was the breaking of a legend. For years, the assassins had thrived on their ability to terrify enemies, but against the Mongols' unrelenting power, fear was useless. The Mongols did not tremble at daggers hidden in cloaks, they answered terror with annihilation. Survivors scattered, their network fractured, and the sect that had once shaken kings with whispers and warnings was reduced to ruins. And yet, even in their defeat, the assassins' reputation only deepened. Tales of their mysterious ways, their daring kills, and their sudden collapse at the hands of the Mongols spread across east and west alike. Their fortresses were gone, their libraries destroyed, but the shadow of their name remained. The fall of Alamet marked the end of their age of power, yet it ensured their story would live on, wrapped in both tragedy and legend. Even after their fortresses were reduced to rubble and their leaders scattered, the assassins refused to vanish from memory. What they had built at Alamet was not simply a network of killers but a legend, and legends often outlive the stones of castles. In the decades and centuries that followed, travelers, chroniclers, and enemies carried their stories far and wide. European knights returning from the Crusades spoke in hushed tones of the Old Man of the Mountain, a figure they imagined as both sorcerer and tyrant, who controlled men so completely that they would leap to their deaths at his command. The Arabic term Hashashin began to morph in European tongues into assassin, a word that would eventually take on a universal meaning detached from its original context. Writers embellished the stories, adding layers of myth that made the assassins seem more supernatural than human. Marco Polo claimed to have heard that Hassan I Sabah used gardens filled with exotic flowers, flowing rivers, and maidens to trick his followers into believing they had glimpsed paradise, promising them eternal reward if they obeyed his orders. While modern historians question such tales, the impact was undeniable. The assassins became larger than life, a symbol of fanatical devotion and shadowy violence, their reputation reaching audiences who had never seen the mountains of Persia. The image of the dagger in the dark became part of the imagination of both East and West. Their true legacy, however, lies in the power of psychological warfare. Though small in number, they forced rulers and armies to live in constant fear, reshaping politics through targeted strikes. In this sense, they anticipated tactics that would echo across history, the use of selective violence to achieve goals far greater than military strength could allow. They demonstrated that terror could be weaponized as effectively as swords or catapults, leaving behind lessons both chilling and profound. Today, the assassins remain a source of fascination. Their story has inspired countless retellings, from medieval chronicles to modern novels, films, and even video games. Yet behind the myths lies the memory of a real community, men and women who believed they were fighting for survival in a hostile world, who built fortresses in the mountains and lived under strict codes of loyalty and sacrifice. Their downfall was inevitable before the Mongol storm, but their legend survived because it touched on something timeless: the fear of the unseen enemy and the allure of power wielded from the shadows. In the end, perhaps that was their greatest weapon. Not the dagger itself, but the thought of it, the knowledge that power can be undone by a single hand, striking in silence, at the moment least expected. Centuries after their fall, the assassins still haunt the imagination, a reminder that sometimes the shadows cast longer legacies than the empires of kings.